Hello everyone, I'm Larry McCoy. I am the Superintendent of the Learning Development Division here at the TEC, and I'd like to welcome you to the latest edition of the Virtual Classroom. Today we're going to talk about effective communication. And as I travel from place to place across this wonderful country and meet people in units such as yours, I always ask the same question. What one thing, if you could change, would you change to try to make your unit better? And almost inevitably, every time, the answer is to communicate more. So today we're going to talk about effective communication. We're going to get into the communication process and the different things that you need to do to make sure that you're communicating properly. We'll talk about some of the barriers to communication and how to alleviate those barriers. And then lastly, we'll talk about listening and how effective listening is part of the communication process. So Dr. Schiffbauer said, basically, communication is about sending the right message to the right audience at the right time, through the right channel, in the right context, for the right purpose. So we're going to break this down piece by piece and talk about it individually. First of all, we're going to talk about the right purpose. So what is the purpose behind communication and why do we communicate in the first place? Well, first of all, the first one is to inform. So we communicate with each other for the sole purpose of giving information from one person to the next to make sure that they're informed of a situation. The next one is to persuade. Many times when we talk to people, we're trying to get them to have buy-in to what we're talking about and understand our perspective of why we're discussing this particular subject. So persuade is a big part of purpose. The next is to gather information. So to make an informed decision, you need to make sure that you can gather all the information at all possible before you make that decision. Colin Powell always said the 40-70 rule applies. So if you have less than 40% of the information to make a decision, you probably don't have enough information and you need to gather more information. If you have more than 70% of the information, you probably can make an informed decision at that point. And then lastly is building relationships. One of the things that supervisors and leaders need to do is to build relationships with their people. Not on a personal level, but as a professional level. Okay, so we need to work to build those relationships, and having great discussions and communicating openly with our people is a great way to build relationships. The next part is the context. What context are we in when we talk about communication? So the circumstances surrounding the communication. So before you have the communication with someone, you need to make sure that the circumstances surrounding that communication are clear, so you know exactly why you're communicating with that individual. The next one is to the right audience, and there's many different parts to the right audience. So first of all, who are they? Need to know your people, need to know how they react to situations, need to know what their ins and outs are. So who are they? Who's the audience, individual or as a group that you're talking to? Next is, what are they like? So do we know our people well enough to know what their ins and outs are, what their vision is, what their opinions are, certain things? So what are our people like? Next of all is the best way to reach them. What is the best way to reach them? And in this case, the many different generations actually react differently to the way to reach them. So the older generations, like the baby boomers and the Generation X, are more so face-to-face and with email, whereas the younger generations are more texting and things of that nature. So what is the best way to reach your audience? And then how might they resist? Anytime that you communicate with someone, especially when it has something to do with something adverse in nature, you want to think ahead of time of how might they resist and how you would mitigate that resistance. And then lastly is what we call WIFM, what's in it for me. Every time we communicate with people, the person who is the receiver of the message wants to know, what is in this information for me? What can I use? What can I use to make myself better? What is in it for me? Next is the message. How about sending the right message? So when we send a message to someone else, number one, we want to make sure that it's clear. We want to make sure, a lot of times we have problems with messages that are being passed from one person to the other, and that receiver of that message doesn't understand the message or why it's being communicated. So we need to make sure that our message is clear. We also need to make sure it's concise. And we want to make sure that we're specific about the message that we're passing to the individuals so they have a clear understanding of what the expectations are. Next is complete. Very well understood that many times in our roles as leadership and things of that nature, we don't have the capability of being complete where we can't share information. But we need to try to be as transparent as possible when it comes to that. And we need to make sure that we're giving a complete message over to that individual as much as possible. And then it needs to be correct. One of the things that many people have said that they like the correct message the first time. It is harder to readjust with incorrect information than it is to have the correct information in the first place. So we want to make sure that we give as much as possible the correct information the first time so they have a clear, concise, and complete message of what is going on. Finally, we need to be courteous. This one is very hard sometimes, especially when we're passing information in the negative nature. Even if that's the case, we can always be courteous to each other and keep in mind the personal attributes and the personal vision and goals of the person that you're passing the message to. Next is through the right channel. How do we pass information from one person to the next? So is it formal or informal? So is it something that we can just go down the hallway and talk to someone about, or is it something that we have to have a closed door formal channel of information that's being passed from one person to the other? Next is verbal or written. Again, is it something that we can just say, hey, I need you to do this, or is it something that we have to actually write out instructions or whatever the case may be to make sure that the information is passed accurately? Face-to-face or remote. So in other words, do we meet with the person just for a couple of moments to pass information, or do we have to go through email, whatever the case may be? So that's another channel that we have to think about. And next is at the right time. This is very important because there are many circumstances that actually dictate time. The first one is availability. So, for example, in this picture here, you see they're working on the flight line. You wouldn't want to go out to the flight line and say, hey, I need you to stop working on this aircraft because I need to talk to you about your EPB. So the person needs to be available and eager to actually have that time to actually pass that communication. Next is priority. Is it something that we can wait on to the next day or whatever the case may be, or later on in the day, or is it something that the information needs to be passed immediately? Emotions is a big one. We always need to take into account emotions, and we're going to also talk about emotions as a barrier to communication. We don't want to try to pass information to someone who is maybe upset about something or has had something happen in their personal lives at the moment that they're actually thinking about. So we need to take emotions into account, because if the person is emotionally distraught, that information is going to be lost. And then the environment. Very simply, this is the room too hot? Is the room too cold? Is it too noisy on the flight line? So you need to pick the right environment to make sure that the information is passed accurately and efficiently. So as we go through the process of passing a message, there are 4 parts to this. The first one is the sender, so the one that's actually giving out the message. And then, of course, the message itself is part of this, and the receiver is the one receiving the information, and then feedback from that receiver to the sender. And you can see it's cyclical in nature, where it actually goes around to all the information is being passed and the communication is stopped at that point. Now, there are many different things that can disrupt this, and this is what we call noise. There are many different things that disrupt the actual passing of the message effectively and efficiently to that individual. So some of the barriers or the noise that actually can create problems. The first one is physical. Are we in a place where we can't see face-to-face with the person? Even when talking to our individuals as leadership or supervisors, sitting on one side of the desk versus the other side of the desk can be a physical barrier to communication. Many people do not like that and take that adversely, the fact that they're sitting on one side of the desk in a position of power versus the other side. And then, as I said earlier, emotional. Emotional is a large barrier to communication. If someone is upset about something or they feel strongly about a situation and they get emotionally involved, that can actually be a barrier to effective communication due to the fact that they're not thinking about the message, they're thinking about the emotional aspect. And then finally is language. And we're not only talking about different languages, we're talking about the same language but maybe different career fields. So for example, I was a weatherman as an active duty member, and our language was very much different than, say, security forces or communications. So the things that we talked about and the way that we talked about situations were much different. So the language that we use from person to person could be different just based on career field and status and things of that nature. So listening and leadership. Listening is very important to the overall aspect of leadership and how we communicate with people. First of all, John Maxwell in the Leadership Handbook said, understanding people precedes leading them. So we have to understand our people before we actually try to lead them. And understanding them is not necessarily getting to know them on a very personal level, but to know exactly what their desires are, what their needs are, things of that nature. But we need to understand people before we can try to lead those people. And listening is the best way to learn. One of the things that John Maxwell said is that the best way to learn for any leader is to listen. And not hear, but listen. Listen to what the person has to say and actually indicate that you are listening to them intently for the purpose of learning their situation. Listening establishes trust. Trust is paramount in a unit, and listening and reacting off of that information that's being passed to that person in a leadership role or a supervisory role actually establishes trust between the team members and establishes trust within the unit. Then listening can keep problems from escalating. One of the things that people have a problem with is when they are actually in a problem situation with another person, is that the other person is not listening to what they have to say, so they don't feel that they're getting their point across. So as we move from situation to situation, listening to each other can actually help keep problems from escalating because we get an idea of what the other person is actually thinking about and their idea of the aspect of the problem. And then finally, listening can improve an organization. One of the things that many units say is that they don't feel that their leadership listens to them. So as leaders and as supervisors, we need to make sure that we need to listen to our airmen, all of our airmen, regardless of rank, status, or situation, to improve the organization. Because many times we get hung up in the old cliche that, oh, he's only an airman, he really doesn't know anything, is really out the window now. As we move through the years, many people in the older days just had a high school diploma, but now we have a lot of our airmen that's coming in with bachelor's and master's degrees, and they have a wide experience behind them. So we need to try to capture that. And one of the ways that we capture that to improve the organization is to listen intently to what they have to say. So to make a point, I'm going to show you a short video that's actually going to talk about listening and the aspects of listening.
First there was PlayStation, aka PS1. Then there's PS2, PS3, and now PS4. And that makes sense. You'd think after Xbox, there'd be Xbox 2. But no. Next came Xbox 360. And now, after 360, comes Xbox One. Why one? Maybe that's how many seconds of thought they put into naming it.
Can you get the butter, please?
Yeah. However, with the Xbox One, I can control my entire entertainment system using voice commands. Up until now, I've had to use Leonard.
Then get the other one. Pass the butter.
Hang on. I don't feel like you're taking this dilemma seriously.
Fine, Sheldon. You have my undivided attention.
Okay, now, the PS4 is more angular and sleek looking.
No way!
It's true, but the larger size of the Xbox One may keep it from overheating.
You wouldn't want your gaming system to overheat?
No, see, well, you absolutely would not. And furthermore, the Xbox One now comes with a Kinect included.
Included?
Yes. Not sold separately. Although the PS4 uses cool new GDDR5 RAM, while the Xbox One is still using the conventional DDR3 memory.
Why would they still be using DDR3? Are they nuts?
See, that's what I thought. But then they go and throw in an ES RAM buffer.
Whoa, wait a second. Who's they?
Xbox.
You're kidding!
No, I am not. And this ES RAM buffer should totally bridge the 100 gigabit per second bandwidth gap between the two RAM types.
This is a nightmare. How will you ever make a decision?
See, I don't know. What should I do?
Please pass the butter!
So the video, even though comical in nature, actually brings up a very good point. The whole idea behind that was the idea that he was thinking about what he wanted to say and didn't feel that she was listening. So even when she intently listened, he still missed the message that she wanted the butter in the first place. So even although comical in nature, it actually is a very good video to make the point. So what do we do to actively listen? How do we get people to understand that we're listening to them? Number one, we need to pay attention. So as someone is talking to us, we need to make sure that we stop what we're doing and we actually look at them face to face to make sure that they understand that we're paying attention to what they have to say. That speaks volumes for the individual that's actually receiving the message. And that goes right hand in hand with show you're listening. So you can actually move your hands, nod your head, that type of thing to show that you're intently listening to what they have to say. Always defer judgment. One of the things that we have a problem with as human beings is we come up with our judgment of what's being said before the entire message is passed. So therefore we end up interrupting the person and we're no longer active listening because of that. So make sure that you defer judgment until all the information is passed to you and then give your idea of what you think the situation is. And then respond appropriately. You want to make sure that you respond to the situation as dictated and not show over emotion in it, but make a good informed decision based on the fact that you actively listen to what the person had to say. So this afternoon we covered the communication process and we talked about barriers to communication to include things such as physical and emotional barriers. And we talked about effectively listening and the importance of effectively listening to the overall process of effective communication. So make sure that you're effectively and efficiently communicating with your people. Don't be afraid to go out and talk to them. Actually make sure that you're going in and you're effectively communicating with them in such a way that they understand that you're actually listening to what they have to say. This speaks volumes for that supervisor or that leader in that leadership position. So I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon, and if you have any questions, please contact me directly. I am the only Lawrence McCoy in the Global, so you can contact me with questions. With that being said, this is all we have for effective communication today, and thank you for attending the virtual classroom, and we will see you next month.
TEC-University. Education your way.